Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, we're going to be breaking down the 2024 National Championship Game for college basketball. We're going to be taking a look at everything from a DFS perspective as well as a player props perspective. So we're going to be breaking down everything you need to know about this game here in this episode. We're going to take a look at the X's and O's from a more of an analytical or a coach's perspective and try to figure out how these two teams are going to play this game, and then trying to figure out who we can play in Showdown DFS or who we can pick for player props that will kind of be indicative of how we think the game is going to be played. So you do not want to miss all of this breakdown. And I got to say, y'all, I'm really looking forward to this national championship game. Like, to me, the college basketball national championship game is like more likely than any other championship game to be a dud. And we've seen this game turn into a dud a lot of years because with the madness that is the NCAA tournament, more often than not, by the time the dust clears, you're left with one team where it's very clear that they're one of the best teams in the nation, and then one team where they're not, just because of how the bracket played out and how the madness shaped everything, right? And this is a year where I genuinely feel like we have the two best teams in the country going at it in the national championship game. You've got one team who is the defending champ, been a juggernaut all season, one of the best teams of all time, according to KenPom, and they've got two NBA lottery picks on their team. And then you've got another squad in Purdue who has literally a giant who, whether you like him or not, whether you like watching him or not, is one of the all-time greats in the history of the sport. And I think that it's going to be a great chess match between two coaches who have proven their mettle in this past two seasons, in my opinion. And I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really interested to see how this game plays out. And I think that there is actually a pretty wide range of outcomes in this game. It would not shock me if you told me that Purdue wins by double digits. It would not shock me if you told me that UConn wins by double digits. It would not shock me if you told me that this game came down to the final shot, which, as a big college basketball fan, that is what I'm hoping for to close the season. Now, another thing that I am excited about, not just this national championship game, it is Masters Week. So if you are familiar with golf at all, this is pretty much the biggest tournament on golf's calendar, and we have a lot of content coming your way for Masters Week. We've already got our player-by-player breakdown up. Tomorrow we are going to be releasing another episode as well as a live stream later on in the week. So make sure you are subscribed to the channel, and make sure that if you are interested in that content, go ahead and tune in for that, because we're going to be doing content for the rest of golf season. Because, in case you haven't noticed, college basketball season is ending. So golf is going to be pretty much our primary focus for a while, but we will also have preseason NFL content, best ball content, college football content, all before the start of next college basketball season. So if you've been with us for all college basketball season, I highly encourage you to find another sport here on the channel, so that way you can keep following us. But, stay subscribed, stay up to date on the other sports, because, if you stay subscribed, you'll know when our college basketball content drops at the start of next season, which we will be back to do yet again. And it has been an absolute blast to do this college basketball season. I've had a lot of great DFS nights this season, and I hope you guys have as well. And I hope that I've been able to give you guys a lot of information that has been able to help you win in DFS, or at least help you get better at college basketball DFS this year. It's, in my opinion, one of the last DFS sports where there's still what's the right word I'm looking for? It's still possible for a non-professional, a non-150 max player to be profitable in college basketball DFS. And to me, that makes it one of the best sports to talk about, because it is a sport where there's still a knowledge gap. It's also a sport where, by doing the research, by listening to the content, by finding the information that you need to find, you can actually go out and win and compete against these people who have bigger bankrolls than you. So if I've helped you at all this college basketball season, please show me a little bit of support. Hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel if you've not already. That way you can be back with us for the next college basketball season. And if you're listening on audio, rate and review for me. It really does help me out a ton, and I really do appreciate it. Those really help the channel get noticed. So if I've helped you this season, help other people find this channel by liking and rating and reviewing if you can, please. I really do appreciate it. All right, so let's go ahead and cut the introduction there, and let's go ahead and dive into what we think is going to happen to this game from an X's and O's perspective. All right, so if you are watching on YouTube, you're looking at the landing page on KenPom. This is pretty much as much as I can show from KenPom, but I do highly recommend it as a tool. If you have not subscribed to KenPom already, it's vastly helped me a ton in terms of playing DFS and picking out player props and the like. But I'm showing what you can see for free on KenPom here on my screen on YouTube. But You're looking on KenPom, you can kind of see the tail of the tape for this game. KenPom has this game projected to be 75 to 72 in favor of UConn for a 3-point spread. Vegas actually has the spread a little bit higher because there's a lot of public money that is going to UConn. And that spread is up to -6 in most sports books that I can find here in North Carolina. But KenPom does have it a little bit closer. KenPom is also factoring in the fact that it is on a neutral floor. But like I said in the intro, these are the two best teams in the country. They're the two best teams in the country in KenPom as well. Purdue does play at the faster tempo. Purdue ranks 211th in the nation in tempo, whereas UConn is 328. So this game does have a chance to get up and down a little bit more than what UConn is used to. But both teams are incredibly balanced as well. Both teams rank in top 12 in efficiency on both sides of the basketball, which is a rarity. You do not see a lot of teams that fit that description. So just everything that you can see from an analytical standpoint, from a numerical standpoint, just indicates that these are the two best teams in the country, and this should be one heck of a basketball game. Now, when you go back and look at both of the teams' losses this season, of which UConn has 3 and Purdue has 4, there are some exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, the teams that beat them did it by taking and making a lot of 3-pointers. And really, that's kind of interesting for this game because, Purdue ranks as a really efficient 3-point shooting team. UConn does not, but that's not how UConn has really, structured their system this year. So it's going to be interesting to see, does UConn try to play that style to match what has beaten Purdue, or does UConn try to do their own thing? But the biggest X's and O's kind of chess match side of this game to me is how will UConn defend Zach Edey? That's the story. Every time you play Purdue, it's really the story pretty much every time Purdue's played for the last 3 seasons. And there have been all kinds of different strategies in defending Edey, and they've all had varying levels of effectiveness, right? So basically, if there were anybody in the nation equipped to defend Zach Edey one-on-one, it would have to be Donovan Clingan. He's only 2 inches shorter. He's got quite a long wingspan. He's pretty athletic. He's pretty strong down low. I mean, Edey does have a little bit of a weight advantage, but Clingan is not just going to be some pushover. So, if there were ever a team that would be equipped to just say, hey, we're going to let you guard Edey one-on-one, it would be UConn with Donovan Clingan. However, the concern would be if they're going to let Clingan go one-on-one with Edey, then Clingan would very likely end up in foul trouble because Edey ranks #1 in the nation in drawing fouls and actually could very well set the Division I record for free throws shot in a season if he takes a lot here in this game. So that's a very risky strategy because you do not want to waste your chess piece on offense that is Donovan Clingan by having him get in foul trouble and having to put in all that effort on the defensive end against Zach Edey. So if Clingan does get in foul trouble, that would bring in Samson Johnson, who pretty much rates out as a foul magnet, has a very high fouls committed per 40 minutes rate. So I don't think that playing single coverage on Edey is how UConn is going to want to go in this game, unless they go with the strategy that they're just not going to foul Edey. They're just going to kind of let him get his and ice out all of the other guards, which could be a viable strategy because Edey's only going to be taking 2s, whereas all those guards would likely be taking 3s. Now, one thing I do think that I saw this weekend when NC State played Purdue was NC State had a lot of success with the late trap on Zach Edey. And here's what I mean by that. So Zach Edey is a lot like a system quarterback in football. If he is able to drop back and know what coverage you are in, then he is able to very quickly figure out what receiver he's going to go to and where he's going to hit him and what route he's going to throw and just move the ball down the field that way. Even if that system quarterback, they know that they're getting blitzed. If they know where the blitz is coming from, they know where their hot route is and they know where to get the ball to, right? Edey is very much in that way from a post standpoint in basketball, right? Like if he knows that you're going to defend him one-on-one, he knows, what shoulder he's going to get you on. He knows how to call for the ball, where to post up, and he knows how to get to his shoulder to do his hook shots. Like he just knows how to get that if you're going to defend him straight up. If you are going to double him right away, he's very smart and a willing passer and good enough to know where the trap is coming from and immediately kick the ball out to a guard for a wide open 3. But what NC State was doing was they weren't sending the trap right away. They were sending the trap after he took a dribble or 2, or after he, gathered and was ready to go up and about to go into his move. And this gave him quite a deal of trouble. And they were able to generate a lot of turnovers off of this action. And I definitely think that UConn saw that. And I definitely think that's something UConn could go to. This is the one way you can really keep Edey off balance is by not letting him go one-on-one and not sending the trap when he's expecting it. If you're able to keep him off guard and keep him guessing, you're going to limit his effectiveness and hopefully force him into a few turnovers. But what you cannot do is just let him go one-on-one because he's going to win, or give him easy kickouts to these guards for threes because they have been good enough this season that they can beat you shooting the three-pointer. That could be a strategy that could work, and you just hope and pray that they have a cold shooting night. But I do think that UConn is going to want to employ the late trap, and I do think they're going to want to mix up their strategy as the game goes on against Zach Edey and keep him guessing. Now, the strategy for defending UConn is equally as interesting. So UConn runs one of the best half-court offenses that I've ever seen. They run a lot of intricate sets where there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of reads, and it requires a lot of high IQ players who can score from different positions, who can pass from different positions, and who can just trust their teammates and do the right thing and make the right decision. And generally speaking, over the course of a 30-second shot clock, they're going to generate a wide open shot, layup, or dunk. It's just poetry in motion watching their half-court offense. Hoop Vision 68 on YouTube has a great video where he details a lot of their sets. But what Alabama did was Alabama did not want UConn to be playing this 30-second offense. They wanted UConn to be having to up their tempo to get them out of rhythm, out of their comfort zone. And so what Alabama said was basically, we'll give you something if you'll shoot the ball quick and we can get back on offense on the other end. And so what they gave them was they gave them Stefon Castle threes. They had Stefon Castle's man sit in the paint and just said, you know what, you're not going to get any cuts. You're not going to get any drives on us. If you want to take this Stefon Castle three, go for it. And Stefon Castle hit the first 2 threes of the game. They kind of got out of that strategy for a little bit, and kind of it was more so the defense that UConn was used to seeing over the course of their game. I have a feeling that was probably a Nate Oates strategy of looking at the numbers and saying, hey, Stefon Castle is a sub 30% three-point shooter. We're going to see if we can get him to be a sub 30% three-point shooter, and that could be our path to winning this game, because if we let them run their offense, then they're going to be generating more points per possession than that 30% three-point shooter. So will Purdue do that strategy or not? I don't know. But one thing I do think you can do to attack Purdue defensively is Zach Edey does not like leaving the paint defensively. He likes being able to sit in there and be, kind of just this wall in front of the basket that blocks everything and is just a presence at the rim. And so if you can really get his man involved in a screen and roll, or if you can get his man out on the three-point line, that causes him some difficulty because that's not where he wants to go, and you lose that rim protection at the rim. And I do think that UConn is smart enough to find creative ways to get Zach Edey away from the rim so that they can attack it with their other guys. So like I said, I think this game is going to be an absolute chess match. I think that both teams are going to be, giving their opponents something that they're not going to be comfortable with, something that gets them out of their comfort zone. And so I do think that this game could end up being a lot lower scoring than expected for that reason. I don't think that either team is going to let the other simply just get to their strength and operate their offense the way they want to operate it. So knowing all that information, how can we apply that to DFS and player props? Well, let's take a look at the board and let's see what we have that we can take advantage of. So if you are playing Showdown DFS for this game, our next segment is going to kind of be an emphasis on that. If you were playing Showdown DFS, one thing I can say is that there's a lot of similarities to playing Showdown DFS as to what we have seen in the recent weeks where we've seen these small 2-game slates, and that's you want to build a lineup that makes sense. You want to play players that fit a narrative and piece together a story, right? If you follow this advice in the college football national championship game this year and said, hey, I'm going to build around the narrative that Michigan blows out Washington, and that's how I think the game is going to go, and I'm going to play a lot of Michigan guys, 2 Michigan running backs, and not a lot of Washington guys, then you probably won a lot of money. And so really building around a certain narrative and building around a narrative that if you are right, then you're going to win a lot of money is the way to go in Showdown DFS. Now, there's also some principles, some general DFS principles that play into this, and that is, ownership and salary construction. So you don't necessarily want to play a lineup that's going to end up being duplicated. So if you find yourself playing a lineup that, uses all the salary perfectly, or is, like a 3-and-3 build or something like that, then that's probably something that's going to be pretty commonly duplicated. So if you don't want to be duplicated, find a way to be unique by leaving some salary on the table or finding a way to play some players that nobody else is going to end up playing. Now, if you were building a player prop card from this game, I think a lot of the same concepts for Showdown DFS apply, build yourself a narrative, right? Like think about what we just talked about where the game is projected to be 75 to 72. And so betting two players to go over 15 points is going to pretty much require them to be two of the primary scorers for that team in the game, right? So, just kind of do the math on what you're building, make sure that it makes sense on what you're building. And that if, you're picking some guy to go over, make sure that the other guys you're picking, whether or not they're going over or under, makes sense with that first play that is going over or under. Now, one thing I will say also, I'm not a perfect Showdown DFS player. I still have a lot to learn with this game. It's probably I don't want to say it's the game style I play the least, but I do not play as much Showdown as I play Classic. And so I'm not perfect at this, but I did have a really big win on Saturday in the NC State and Purdue game. And one thing I did in that one, I actually won the end one. It was a split among, I think 11 players, but my lineup was the optimal lineup. So one thing that I did in that game was thinking about who to fade as opposed to who to play. So what I sat down when making that lineup was said, okay, I am going to strategically fade DJ Burns, Muhammad Diarra, and Ben Middlebrooks because centers don't do crap against Purdue. And I am going to build my lineup around that. And so if those guys are not doing well, then who might be doing well? And so what I said was, okay, if those guys are not doing well, then that likely means that NC State is going to need a lot of scoring from their guards. And so I played DJ Horn and Jaden Taylor from NC State because they're their two best scorers from the guard position. And then on the Purdue side, obviously I went with Zach Edey because he generally dominates because he's Zach Edey. And then I played Braden Smith and then Lance Jones and Fletcher Lawyer and just said, hey, these are this team's leading four scorers. If Purdue is going to win this game, it's probably going to be because of those four scorers. And it all fit together by the way that I constructed it and by strategically fading Burns, Diarra, and Middlebrooks. And then by, kind of construction, fading O'Connell and Gillis and Trey Kaufman-Renn, I was able to avoid all of the bad plays and I was able to see myself at the top of the leaderboard. That is certainly a strategy that you can use here in this game. Now, when you're constructing your lineup in this game, there's two guys that the entire lineup revolves around, and that is Zach Edey and Donovan Clingan. It should come as no surprise. So the question is, when you build your lineups, are you going to go Edey? Are you going to go Clingan? Are you going to go both? You're going to go neither. There's four options, and I do think that I could see a genuine path to victory for all four options. If you're thinking about playing both, then the whole concept would be that neither of these guys are going to get in foul trouble because they're not playing physical on each other. And because they're not playing physical on each other, that leads to a lot of success on the offensive end for each other. That would be the concept behind playing both. Now, they're both also very expensive, so you would have to find ways to get cheaper on the other end, or certainly not use either of them in the captain slot on DraftKings or FanDuel. Now, if you want to play neither, the concept would be that both of those two guys could find themselves in foul trouble going up against each other. So if you're going to play neither, figure out a way that say, hey, who's going to be getting the minutes, who is going to be getting the points if Edey and Clingan are on the bench or in foul trouble, right? So those are your options on that. Now, when it comes down to Edey or Clingan, let's go ahead and take a look at that. So just looking at pricing construction on DraftKings, Zach Edey would have to outscore the rest of the field by 25% more fantasy points in order to be considered a value at his price tag. So in other words, if Edey gets to, or if anybody in the field gets to 40, Clingan would have, if anybody in the field gets to 40, Edey would have to get to 50 to be considered a value. Yes, I did all the math there right. I just needed to figure out how to word that sentence. But yes, if anybody in the field gets to 40, Edey would need to get to 50 to be considered a value. And that's quite difficult, right? So if you play Edey, you're definitely hoping on everybody else having a general lack of success. Now, the game against NC State was a relative low one for Zach Edey. He only had 44 fantasy points, which is his low in the postseason Big Ten tournament and NCAA tournament play. And in that game, he only had a 27% usage rate. As we stated, the NC State late double really gave Edey some issues. He did not get to the foul line a whole lot because they just made the decision that they were not going to foul him and give him free throws, and that ended up with a low fantasy total, relatively speaking, from a Zach Edey perspective. Now, on the other side, though, not a whole lot of centers have a lot of success against Zach Edey. Graham Ike in the Sweet 16 set the season high for fantasy points from the center position against Purdue with 35 fantasy points, and some of that came when the game was already out of hand. So Donovan Clingan, if he were to get to 36 fantasy points, would be setting a record for what has been done against Purdue this year. But I do like the chances for Donovan Clingan to get there, but it is contingent on him staying on the floor. He needs to get high minute totals if he wants to reach his ceiling, particularly against Zach Edey. So he is going to have to stay out of foul trouble. He is going to have to be in the type of game environment where he is not going to be out of conditioning. He is not going to be out of shape. He is going to be able to be involved in every single possession that will allow him to hit his ceiling. So there's a lot of question marks on whether that can actually happen or not. But like I said, it's your decision on whether you want to play Edey, Clingan, neither or both. And that is just information that can help inform your decision. Do you think that UConn throws something at Edey that he's not expecting and he struggles? Or do you think that Clingan is just going to foul Edey and Edey's going to be the one that eats? Like that's for you to answer when you construct your lineup. I know I am going to be playing multiple lineups, so I will be building multiple lineups around all of these constructions here tomorrow night. But like I said, to me, your entire lineup revolves around, are you doing Edey? Are you doing Clingan? Are you doing both? Or are you doing neither? Now, for the rest of the board, Tristan Newton is an interesting one. He had a 25% usage rate against Alabama, which was second amongst all the UConn starters, but it only led to 29 fantasy points because he was pretty inefficient from the field. Tristan Newton is a guy who tends to play his best in big games. It was this way last year. It's been this way this year. And so it was kind of shocking to see him, play relatively poorly 2 games in a row against Illinois and then against Alabama. Last year, Cam Spencer was the guy that you had to have in the national championship game against San Diego State. He was the leading fantasy scorer in that game. And so is there a chance that he could do that again? Absolutely. I see him as being the best matchup for UConn going up against Purdue. I think he's going to be too quick for Purdue's guards. They have not dealt well with guards who have a lot of lateral agility like Boo Buie from Northwestern. So I do think that Tristan Newton is going to pose a little bit of a matchup issue for Purdue. But the thing is he's going to have to score without getting all the way to the rim because nobody really scores getting all the way to the rim when Zach Edey is down there. So it's definitely going to be a little bit of a different, type of environment from Tristan Newton from what he's used to. But this guy absolutely does possess the ability to be the highest scoring fantasy player on the entire slate. Now, Cam Spencer has picked up the slack when Tristan Newton has not been playing well. And I think that he would be a natural pivot if you are not playing Tristan Newton to play Cam Spencer. Reason why, look at the fantasy point totals in the last 2 games, 41.5 against Illinois, 35.5 against Alabama. He has not had the same usage rate that Newton has, but he is an elite rebounder. He has an elite assist rate as well, and he will get you some steals, and he's just an efficient scorer who also doubles as a good 3-point shooter. I a lot of good things to say about Cam Spencer. He will not have an athleticism against Purdue's guards like Tristan Newton will, but he doesn't really need it because he doesn't really have that against a whole lot of the teams that he's played over the course of the season, and that hasn't stopped him from being successful all season. He's now at 35 fantasy points or more in 3 straight games. So do I necessarily sit here and think that you have to have Newton or Spencer? No, but I do think that you would give yourself leverage on the other if you were to play just one of them. Now, Braden Smith, to me, I really do not like cash games in Showdown DFS, 50-50s or double ups. But if you play them, Braden Smith would have to be your guy in that, in my opinion. He had an absolute floor game against NC State. He was 1 for 9 from the field, 1 for 5 from 3, had 5 turnovers, played terribly just from the eye test watching that game. But he still ended up with 26 fantasy points, still had a 20% usage rate in that game. So there's no way he's going to score under 26 fantasy points, pretty much, if we're being honest, right? Like that game environment only had 113 points scored. Purdue only scored 63. He was terrible, and he still got up 26 fantasy points because of what he does in the peripheral stats. So Braden Smith is a guy with a really high floor, and he's also been the guy, we talked about this on the Final Four show, he is the guy who tends to hit his ceiling games when Zach Edey is not playing well. So if you were going to be fading Zach Edey, then it would be very likely that Braden Smith would be having a really good game. But because of what he does in the peripheral stats also, I do think you can play him in Edey lineups as well. I don't think it has to be dichotomous one or the other. That's one thing a lot of DFS people do, in my opinion, that I don't necessarily agree with, is there's a lot of people who think there's a lot of dichotomy of, oh, you have to play this guy. Oh, you can't play this guy. Oh, you can't play them together. You have to play them together. No, it's daily fantasy sports. Like, there's no exact science to it. There is no rules that say who you have to or don't have to play. And I'm just telling you what the numbers indicate. But I do think that Braden Smith would be a very solid pivot for a non-Edey lineup. But if you're building around a Purdue blowout or a really high up tempo game, that would also be, beneficial to Braden Smith as well. Now, Alex Caravan and Stefon Castle were two guys that really came through for me in DFS on Saturday. They were guys that I didn't necessarily like all that much on paper, but as the week went on and nobody was talking about them and it seemed like nobody was playing them, they became two guys that I really made an effort to get into my lineups, and it paid off. Caravan only needed 6 shots to put up 32 fantasy points against Alabama, and I really think that he could be important for what UConn does to this Purdue defense. Alex Caravan will space the floor. He's a good 3-point shooter, and he also played some minutes at the 5 when UConn was without Donovan Clingan. Now, I do not think that that will be their strategy in this game long term, because I would not want Alex Caravan guarding Zach Edey for the entire game, but that is something that they showed and something that they could do offensively to show Purdue a different look and really space the floor and get Zach Edey out of position if they wanted to go that route. So Alex Caravan, I do think, is a really solid play. I think you can play him with or without Clingan, Newton, Spencer, any of those other guys, because a lot of his baskets are assisted, and he is a pretty solid rebounder and a decent assist rate from a forward as well. Stefon Castle is going to be an NBA lottery pick, and it's almost like Alabama forgot about that. They let him steal the show in that Final Four game on Saturday night. He led UConn in usage rate at 29%, was 7 for 13 from the field, 2 for 6 from 3, and put up 32 fantasy points. He was electric in that game. The only concern I have for him in this game is I do expect Castle to be the one who is guarded by Lance Jones, who is Purdue's best perimeter defender. And if that is the case, he's the guy that can kind of match Castle's athleticism, and that will be the guy that could kind of limit him. But I do think that Castle has a ton of upside. And what I'm hoping you guys have noticed is that when Tristan Newton did have his floor game in the last 2 games, Spencer, Caravan, and Castle really picked up the slack. So if you're going to be fading Newton, I do think that it would make sense to play multiple of those guys in his place. Now, to me, it does feel like Fletcher Lawyer and Lance Jones are going to have to hit some threes here in this game for Purdue to win it. A big story to Purdue season is their improved 3-point shooting from last season as a team, and in large part, it's due to Fletcher Lawyer being better, as well as Lance Jones's addition from Southern Illinois. So I think that if you're building around a Purdue win, it makes sense to play either of these two guys, because they're going to be two guys that are going to have to score the basketball if Purdue is going to win this game. You know, you look at their game logs here. Lance Jones took 9 threes against NC State. Fletcher Lawyer took 5, but he filled up the stat sheet in a variety of ways, and both of them ended up at 22 fantasy points. And in a game like this in Showdown DFS, that would be enough for you to consider them a solid value. Do I think you can play them together? Yeah. Do I think you can play one or the other? Yeah. Do I think you can play neither of them? Yeah, just make sure that it fits the narrative that you're building around. If you're building around a Purdue victory, I would make sure to include Lawyer and Jones. Now, I'm going to lump together Gillis and Kaufman-Renn for Purdue because they are playing the 4 spot for Purdue, and Gillis has been playing more minutes largely because he's a much better 3-point shooter than Trey Kaufman-Renn. Trey Kaufman-Renn's almost like having 2 centers on the floor. So Gillis has been playing more minutes. He hasn't turned it into any big-time fantasy performances yet, but that floor spacing is something that could help Purdue quite a ton, whereas Kaufman-Renn will be the guy that if they want to go bully ball and they want to go big and force Alex Caravan to have to guard down low, Kaufman-Renn would be that guy. So in terms of lineup construction, I probably would not play Kaufman-Renn in a Caravan lineup because I don't think that that would end well for one of the two of them, just how I see it. But Gillis is a guy that I do think will end up playing more minutes in that spot, and his floor spacing could be key for Purdue if he can knock down a few threes. Now, the backups for UConn are Diarra and Johnson. Diarra is going to be like the most popular value play on this slate. He's playing north of 20 minutes pretty much in every NCAA tournament game. His shooting has been hit or miss, but he will fill up the stat sheet in a variety of ways. He pretty much plays the entirety of the minutes that any of their starting guards don't play. So if you are fading one of the starting guards, it would make sense that, you know, Diarra would be playing boosted minutes. And I do think he's a guy that can shine in those boosted minutes. You know, he did have 23 fantasy points against San Diego State. More importantly, though, if you were going to try to factor in this game being blowout, he would be the number 1 beneficiary of a blowout. He tends to really shine and really excel in UConn's blowout wins, and he would be a guy that you would have to consider if that's what you're building for. Samson Johnson is directly the backup center. UConn is not playing any other backup centers other than Samson Johnson right now. Like I said earlier, though, he does have a supremely high foul rate, so even if he were to like stay on the floor for a while, he could find himself in foul trouble. But if Donovan Clingan is in foul trouble, Samson Johnson would be out on the floor and be playing a quite sizable role offensively and defensively. He looked really solid to me against Alabama. He only played 10 minutes, so he only put up 12 fantasy points, but 1.2 fantasy points per minute is pretty solid. And if Clingan does find himself in foul trouble, Johnson makes sense as a really, really solid value play here on this slate. Now, the other guy for Purdue that's like a lock to see minutes is Camden Heide. He's more of a stretch forward that can come in and take some threes. Whether or not he makes them is going to determine his fantasy scoring, but he's like as low down on the board as you can go in Showdown DFS and have a guy that, is certain to see minutes, is certain to get some shots up. On the UConn side, Jalen Stewart is likely to play, but his role is TBD. Solomon Ball did not play against Alabama, but he's been another backup guard for them. I probably wouldn't play anybody else on the UConn side. And as for Purdue, really, Miles Colvin is really the only other guy who regularly plays, but he hasn't played more than 4 minutes in a game since the round of 32 against Utah State. Ethan Morton has played at points this season, but he's not really used a whole lot. So I would just generally be avoiding anybody down here below Camden Heide. But like I said, Stewart and Colvin are guys that will actually see the floor and play, but probably not enough to be fantasy viable. All right, so that does it for the Showdown DFS preview for the College Basketball National Championship Game. Hopefully, we're able to give you guys plenty of information that you can use to build some Showdown DFS lineups as well as some winning player prop slips here for this National Championship Game. And unfortunately, y'all, that's going to bring this episode and this college basketball season to a close. And we've had an absolute blast here this season talking hoops with you from November until March. We did some live streams in February and March, got that going, which was a blast. And so, we're going to be back next season. And so it's kind of bittersweet that this season is coming to an end, but it's been a great season for us. I hope it's been a great season for you. And I'm hoping that we can make it one more great night here on Monday night. And then we will be back with you guys next November to talk hoops all over again. And if you remember last year, if you were with us, opening night was a great night for us because we were able to really dig deep and do some research and find some guys that were just straight up misprices, like Riley Minix of Morehead State, who was $3,000 on the opening night slate, and make ourselves a ton of money on opening night. And so I'm hoping that you guys will be back with us for the start of next college basketball season as well. And I really hope that that's the case. All right, so that does it for this episode, guys. Like I said, that's pretty much all I got. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so that we can be with us for the start of next college basketball season, or you can get all of our other sports content, like the content for the Masters this week for golf, all of our other weekly golf content that's going to be coming out, as well as NFL preseason, best ball, and college football content that's coming your way as well. But other than that, y'all, that's pretty much going to wrap us up for this episode. If you like what you saw on YouTube, please hit the like button. It helps me out a ton. I really do appreciate it. And if you were watching on, or if you're listening to audio, then please rate and review. It really does help me out a ton, helps the podcast get noticed, and I cannot stress enough how much I appreciate that. All right, y'all. So that's going to do it for this episode. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you guys next time.